Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we are talking about wintertime jig fishing, finesse jigs, and about some quick modifications that you can do to really maximize your time on the water during these colder months. This is one of my favorite times to throw a jig, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. The size of fish that you're gonna catch, how easy it is to feel the bite on the jig, because they tend to just eat that thing. Of course there are exceptions, but generally it's that thunk, that hard jig bite. And then one of the main reasons is because this time of year you don't need that big heavy jig fishing equipment. You can go with lighter rods, lighter line, you can go with lighter hooks. That's why you're able to get away with it, but you still get to catch those big fish, because big bass are not as strong in the cold water as they are in the warm water in the summertime. Warm summertime conditions, you hook a jig fish on 10 or 12 pound line and a finesse hook, they're gonna tear you up. But this time of year you can drop down, go to that light line, and when you get that big bite, well, you get that big bite because you did drop down, and then when you do get the bite, you can fight those fish much more easily and get them in the boat. So first off, you want to simplify. I mean, this is my finesse jig box. There's 5 colors in there total that I'm fishing with this time of year. I keep it very simple and I keep it very, very natural. And like every video, down in the video description, we'll link you all the baits, the gear. I'll specify the colors. I'll make it really, really easy for you. But only 5 colors, but 3 different kinds of jigs. I keep it that simple. And then just a couple of trailers. The 3 jigs that I'm using are a true finesse jig, a ball head style jig with a finesse cut, and then a football jig with a finesse hook in it. It's the standard football jig. And then what's called a casting jig, which is basically very, very similar to the pitching jig that we like to throw the rest of the year. Almost an Arky style head, but with a much, much lighter hook in it, an O'Shaughnessy style hook. Much lighter hooks, again, you can go to lighter line. Those are the 3 that I like. I mix it up a lot because I find that on a given day, the bite will veer one way or the other. Sometimes they are on a finesse jig, I mean, like it's candy. They are just tearing that thing up. And then you'll come out to get back on that bite and they won't be eating it. But you switch to that full skirt and you start catching those fish again. So that's why I keep my options open and adaptable. Now, the finesse jig, that's probably my favorite. Typically, I'm gonna pair it up with a double tail grub. Double tail grubs, I use both a 4-inch and a 5-inch, but something to keep in mind, again, you want to keep it simple. If you just buy 5-inch grubs and you find yourself in a situation like this, we're on Tim's boat, we're 5 hours from home, I find that these fish are just eating that little finesse jig like they were this morning, and I can just trim down that grub and get that smaller body shape. It's gonna fit my jig a lot better. Much more compact profile, but I still get those larger arms, the larger claws of that 5-inch trailer. That guy there. And they were eating that thing this morning, my goodness. Now, something else to keep in mind with these double tail grubs, if you look at them, depending on how they've laid in the package, if you actually take one and hold it, you'll find that the claws want to lean one way or the other. One way it lays better than it does the other way. You want to lay that jig, when you go to thread it on, you want the side that wants to lay open and lay out, you want that to be facing up. You want the hook to come out of that side of the jig. If you turn it over where they want to fold in, down on bottom, you're not going to get near the action out of the jig. The claws are going to tend to stick together and really kill the profile of that jig. So be careful which way you rig that guy. And then second, that casting jig. Typically going to use a full profiled trailer on there. So either the 5-inch double tail, or the other one that I use is a beaver. But again, don't be afraid to get creative with a pair of scissors. Trim that bait down. If it's a smallie beaver, I typically just cut down the top. Take the first 4 or 5 ribs off the top. That's gonna really tighten up the profile of that bait. If you only have bigger beavers with you, take the side off them too, so that that skirt material doesn't want to stick to it. Really narrow that thing up. You get a much more compact appearance out of that jig. And I just find in the wintertime that little compact profile gets a lot more bites, and it still gets the quality bites. And then if you are using a beaver, of course you want to always separate the claws. See how good that guy looks. But flip side, if I did go with a double tail grub, overall profile is going to be shorter. So I want to modify my skirt. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes that you're going to see guys make. So I'm going to find which way it wants to lay up, thread on, and then pop out that side, that threaded, or that side that wants to face up. And then it's going to lay open really well. Missed him? Now, one of the biggest mistakes I see guys make this time of year is that they use a full-bodied jig, meaning full skirt material. See how that skirt material is already interfering with that trailer? They're sticking to each other. So what I'll do, if I'm using a double tail grub especially, because the double tail grub will actually swim in the water, and it adds a lot of action, especially when you're reeling up to the boat, and sometimes you get a bonus bite. But if your skirt's too long, you don't do that. The skirt interferes with the trailer, messes it up. So one of my favorite things that I do to almost all my full profile jigs in the cold water is I turn that jig upside down, and I find I have my shorter strands underneath, longer strands on top. I'm gonna cut them all to the exact same length. So I'm taking what? Almost 3/4 of an inch off of that. And now I've still got a full-bodied jig. In fact, on bottom, it's gonna poof up even a little more, almost like that the front of that finesse jig does. But now I'm not interfering with my claws at all. I catch a lot more fish that way. And the last one is the football jig. I love fishing a finesse football. You can do anything with it. What I like about them is that they get caught up a lot. Now that sounds like a silly thing to say. If you're using a flipping head, a pointed head jig, and you get it down into, say, a couple of rocks and you get stuck in there, it's wedged itself in and it's really stuck and you're typically gonna break off. A football with that big wide head on it, you come up to rocks and it will tend to get hung up and stick, but it doesn't wedge in because it's all the same width. So typically I can snap my line, pull that line and snap it and get it to pop free. And you get a lot of bites when you pop up out of a snag. Right when it comes loose of the snag, those fish, they've been sitting there watching it as it's sitting in the snag. And when it bolts up out of there, they're on it. So a football jig is great because it'll get stuck a lot, but it doesn't actually get snagged. And I can pop it loose and use it very aggressively. But you can also just drag bottom with it. Just pull along the bottom, which is what we've done a lot of today. Just pulling down there in deep water. And you have a lot of weight options. You can throw a really light football, but you can throw a really, really heavy football when you're fishing deep. Save yourself a lot of time and a lot of headaches trying to get down to those fish. Again, I love that finesse jig. Absolutely love it. That's one of my favorite baits to throw in the wintertime. But those heads, you're limited on your weight options. They don't make great big giant finesse jigs. So if you're throwing one of those, you're typically fishing, I'd say, above 30 foot, 5 to 30 feet of water. After that, you're losing your mind trying to fish that lightweight. But you can take a football jig, a heavy football, trim that skirt up short, almost even with that hook, put a double tail grub on there, you know, use a 1/2 or a 3/4 ounce, and you can fish that thing down 50, 60, 70, 80 feet of water, and then turn around, fire it right up there in 5 or 10 feet of water, catch those fish too. As far as rods go, to keep it really, really simple, I actually fish shorter rods this time of year, and I've got a handful of reasons for that. But that shorter rod, I've got a lot more, I can be more responsive when I work the bait, and I'm a lot more connected to it, because a lot of times these fish, they're not like a summertime fish. They're not going to come up and just crush that jig and dig back down in the cover. They're just going to come up and pick it up and put it back. So you want a sensitive rod. You want to really be able to feel that bite. And then with that shorter rod, I can stick them with a shorter hook set. I don't need that full loaded up long rod hook set. I can just snap a hook set, because when the jig is heavier, the heavier it gets, they're gonna hold on to that jig for a shorter period of time. Like a little finesse jig, they'll pick it up and swim around with it because the weight isn't unnatural. But if they pick up a 3/4 or a 1 ounce jig, they typically pick it up and blow it back out. They don't hold on to it very long. So with a shorter rod, feel that bite, you've got them. You don't have to have a big monster set on them. Makes a big difference. I'm fishing braid like always. I mean, I say like always, but like most of the time. But again, I'm dropping down. I'm using 40-pound braid. So this is a 7'1" rod specifically. 7'1", 853. So is that a medium heavy? A Cronarch spooled with 40-pound braid with 12-pound mono. And I know some people are going to say, why are you using mono? But those of you that watch a lot of our videos already know this. Mono is incredibly forgiving. It's incredibly absorbing. When I'm fishing that lighter line, 10 or 12 pound, and catching big fish, mono, if they make a last second run at the boat, mono will absorb that impact. Whereas your other lines, your fluoro and your copolys, they're more likely to shatter on a really hard run right at the boat when the water's cold or your line is cold. It's a lot more likely that they're going to blow your leader. Mono's just going to eat that shock up. You're going to get those fish in the boat. And when you're fishing that 10 or 12 pound, I mean, what do you think we have for Viz today? 15? Oh.
What's that?
15 foot of Viz today?
At least, yeah.
At least 15 feet of Viz here. We're up in the foothills on a clear water reservoir. Crystal clear water. They have no problem chasing down and eating that jig on mono. They're not worried about it, so don't let that get in your head. Guys, if you're not jig fishing in the wintertime, you're missing the boat. Now you can catch fish a ton of different ways, but the jig is fun. They hit it harder than they hit most baits. You can get monster bites. You can still catch a lot of fish. With a little bit of an adaptation, you can really dial it in. And it doesn't take a lot of gear to do it, because you can do it with so few colors. Just a couple of trailers. Very, very easy. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon.